Welcome, everyone. This is our first Enlightened Soil live webinar. We appreciate you being here and joining us and showing some support for the regenerative movement that we're all a part of. My name is Camille. I am the Director of Education here at Enlightened Soil Corps. I also help manage livestock on a regenerative farm up in Western Michigan. And Yazzie, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Yazzie. I'm the Partner Program Coordinator with Enlightened Soil, and I also man all of the social medias, so I've probably slid into your DMs, and feel free to slide in whenever.
Awesome. So we will start with our agenda for the night. We are going to first, Yazzie's going to give the origin story of Enlightened Soil Corps. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how EnSoil Algae works, the mechanisms. Then we have our special guest, Ray Archuleta, who's going to talk about how EnSoil can drive change in the regenerative sector. Then the bulk of our time will be questions from you all, and we will do our best to answer them. And then finally, we encourage you to spread the knowledge that you learn from this webinar community to your local community in whatever way it looks like for you. So Yazzie, over to you.
Thank you, Camille. Okay, so the story of Enlightened Soil Corps. I want to start by saying that there are a lot of impactful people that have helped us get to where we are today. This is just a short snippet of that story that started over 10 years ago. And here is the main character of this story. To the left, Dr. George Taylor. He's our founder. And there he is holding a huge bushel of basil, EnSoil treated basil on Sweetgrass Garden, which is where the story begins. So Dr. Taylor was a former cardiologist and a lifelong gardener and started seeing the link between soil health and human health. And this prompted him to buy 2 acres of land on Johns Island, South Carolina, which is where we're based, and create a nonprofit farm called Sweetgrass Garden with a mission to cultivate nutrient-dense, chemical-free food and deliver it to local communities in need. So after some initial soil tests, Dr. Taylor and his team realized the land needed a lot of regeneration and started researching regenerative farming methods to use so they could do this, grow the food nutrient dense and chemical free. And that's when they came across Chlorella vulgaris, a fresh green water algae that has been tested and used as a soil and plant amendment since the 70s. So in 2018, they began researching the use of Chlorella vulgaris on sweetgrass, and the results were profound. The soil health, plant productivity, everything, they were amazed by how much everything was improving. So Dr. Taylor asked himself the question that started this whole company, which is, why is this not commercially available? And the answer to that was threefold. First, algae wasn't in that initial wave of biologicals coming out with the regenerative movement. 2, fertilizers were still kind of affordable. And 3, nobody had figured out how to grow, how to bottle and ship these live photosynthetic organisms yet. So in 2018 to 2020, Dr. Taylor and his team sought out to develop a grow method that would be able to bottle and ship these incredible living organisms, and they did it. So Enlightened Soil Corps was formed in October 2020, and in the midst 2018 to 2020, while they were developing that grow process, they were working really hard with local growers to validate the observations they were seeing at sweetgrass with the Chlorella vulgaris. So then by 2021, Enlightened Soil Corps received their first ever SARE grant based at Iron Horse Farm in Johns Island, South Carolina. And the question they were trying to answer was this: does reduction of nitrate inputs in pasture land treated with Chlorella vulgaris result in cost savings and healthier soil and grass? So the number 1 ranked pasture was treated with algae alone. And the number 2 ranked pasture was treated with algae and 25% of the usual NPK input. And now, with this focus on soil health and biology, Iron Horse Farm doesn't use fertilizer anymore. And it's no coincidence that the pond off of the ranch doesn't have algal blooms anymore. So this trial is important because it was the first big one, and it's also at the heart of our mission, which is to help the world transition away from chemically dependent agriculture. And soil algae is not a silver bullet, but it is a reliable tool in the world's toolbox to help with this transition. And Chlorella vulgaris is just one microorganism that has a role to play here. And just want to point out that this is part of our team. Obviously, a few members, me and Camille, missing from the picture. And as you can tell, we started the company during COVID times, hence the social distancing in the photo. But thanks for listening, and I'll hand it back to you, Camille.
Thanks, Yaz. Great. So now I'm going to go into the mechanisms on how this powerhouse EnSoil algae works. So as Yazzie said, the algae strain is called Chlorella vulgaris. This is a living strain of green freshwater algae. And we apply this in a micro application, which means that we use a really small amount of concentrated live cells over a large area of land. And it's important to note that this is one tool of many. This is not a singular solution. This is one part of a huge amount of biological regenerative solutions for repairing land. So Chlorella vulgaris works as a powerful biostimulant, which means that it encourages the natural processes of nutrient cycling and soil microbe activity in our soil and to stimulate plant growth. So this is not a fertilizer. We are not adding any nutrients to the system. We are just stimulating and encouraging microbes to do the work that they are meant to do in the soil to accelerate the growth of our plants and make them more nutrient dense. So there are 4 main mechanisms that we know of for how the algae works. And I'm going to show you this through an infographic, but I'll just name the 4 right here before we go into that. So first, EnSoil algae stimulates and grows microbial population and diversity in the soil. Second, the algae increases plant nutrient uptake and improves overall plant health. Third, algae enhances the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is that green pigment that you see in plants and improves the photosynthetic capacity. And then fourth, EnSoil algae increases plant tolerance to stress and soil water retention capacity. So I'm going to go into more detail across all 4 of these as you're looking at a visual guide. So this infographic shows 2 sides, one with synthetic NPK fertilizer and one with EnSoil algae. This is just to have a comparison point. So we're going to start on the right side, and if you want to follow along with me, I'm going to go bottom to top from the bottom right-hand corner. So first, when you apply EnSoil algae to your plant, it's got roots in the ground, there's sunlight shining, it happens to be pink today. The EnSoil application stimulates the growth of your microbial population and diversity. So what happens is the microbial population grows in quantity, but also in diversity of species. And it's important to note that when you have a really healthy community of microbes in the ground, you're able to reduce your dependence on synthetic nutrients from fertilizer. And this is one of multiple ways that EnSoil algae increases your return on investment. You're saving money on those expensive fertilizer costs. Second, as we move up the right side, bacteria are fixing or converting atmospheric nitrogen into a usable form for plants. So when you have this healthy microbial community, you have these soil bacteria that can help do this. And what happens is your plant is able to have more energy and more nutrients, and it can show better nutrient values in things like plant tissue analyses, which we have tested with EnSoil and have found that both macro and micronutrients in the crops treated with EnSoil are improved. Third, when in-soil algae is applied, the chlorophyll, again, that green pigment, is enhanced and the plant can photosynthesize more efficiently. So the plants take in carbon dioxide. When they photosynthesize, they are able to draw that carbon into the ground and more carbon is released through the roots into the soil. Lastly, at the top of the right-hand side, in-soil increases plant tolerance to stress, and it actually optimizes soil conditions to tolerate stress such as drought or salinity. The way that this works is it stimulates the plant to release some enzymes, these chemicals that help the plant survive the changes in conditions. And with regard to the soil water retention capacity, you can think about the soil as a habitat, as a home for all of these microbes. And the microbes build structure. They build little walls and little habitats in the soil. And when you have more structure, you don't have as much erosion or as much runoff. So your soil is actually able to retain more moisture. And because in-soil is attracting this strong community of microbes, there you get your water retention capacity and plant tolerance. So now I'm going to just compare this to a situation where you're using a synthetic fertilizer. For those of you that don't know what NPK stands for, this is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Synthetic fertilizers are chemically produced nutrients that you are adding to the system. So we're going to continue to go with the example of nitrogen on this side, but we'll follow from the top left down to the bottom left. So when you add nitrogen, synthetic nitrogen, to the soil, it's inaccessible to the plants without this strong soil community of your microbes. So the plant is not really able to use it to grow, and it needs its help from these microbes to convert it into a usable form. What happens is the nitrogen gets loose in the soil. So as you can see in the image, there's all this loose nitrogen. And when it's not stored somewhere in the plant or in the bacteria, it's more likely to contaminate water systems and run off into drinking water and the local watershed. Some of it will also return to the atmosphere and as nitrogen gas. So all of this excess soil nitrogen makes the conditions unlivable for microbes. And what happens is the soil turns from this really abundant, living, vibrant ecosystem to something that's dead. If any of you have ever heard the from soil to dirt, this is what we're talking about here. We're killing off these organisms that are really helpful in our system by introducing a chemical form of nutrients. So what happens is after the plant nutrients are used up, or they've run out of the soil and water, or they've moved into the atmosphere, the plants need new nutrients to grow. And this turns into a cycle where they now require an additional treatment of synthetic fertilizer, which costs more money and more time to apply. So what I'm showing here is that with synthetic fertilizer, you are adding more money, there are high costs, and you're really taking a toll on those soil microbes. So at EnSoil, at Enlightened Soil Corps, we recommend a transition away from these synthetic chemical fertilizers through an introduction of algae. We completely understand that many growers are relying on fertilizer for their crop yield, and we encourage you to add this biology to your system to keep the crop yield high and also to increase your return on investment as you transition away from your chemicals. So if you have any questions about this infographic or any of the mechanism information that I've talked about here, please take a note of it or type it in the Q&A right now, and we will return to that after Ray speaks. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Ray Archuleta, and he will talk a little bit about how EnSoil can drive change in the regenerative sector. But Yazzy's going to start with a quick question for Ray.
Okay, Ray, I got a question. How did you get introduced to Enlightened Soil / EnSoil Algae?
Yeah, well, first, thank you, Yazzie, Camille, for having me, and welcome the virtual group. I always love talking to people face to face, but we're not going to be able to do that. So thank you for showing up. It really says a lot about the group because, one, I always know when people want to learn. One, it's when they're willing to put up their time, and two, they're willing to put up their money. So you can always tell those type of people set themselves apart. So thank you for showing up, all of you. And back to Yazzie, what got me started? Well, I got 4 reasons. I wrote them down, Yazzie. First, Russell Hedrick. Some of you may know that Russell Hedrick is, well, he's a friend of mine. I've known him for quite a long time. In fact, when he was starting his journey down regenerative agriculture, I lived in North Carolina, and I was one of the agronomists at the tech center in North Carolina, located in Greensboro. And I'll never forget, I got a phone call from Russell Hedrick, and we started to visit, and we really hit it off. But I quickly noticed that this young man who started agriculture, well, he actually started his career as a fireman and a diesel mechanic, but he's probably one of the most brilliant agriculturist farmers that I've exposed to. And so we've built this really long relationship, and it's been a wonderful journey. And my journey with EnSoil started when Russell, him and I talk quite often, and he told me, well, when all of you know, if you don't know, Russell's the corn champion of North America, and he just won that. And how did he do that? And he did it by no-till, which, by the way, is not supposed to work, cover crops, which are not supposed to work, and managing his nutrients. Oh, and by the way, also the Haney test, which is junk science, which reduced his fertility, and he did it with 40% less fertilizer. And the reason I bring these things up, because I was one of the ones that spread the Haney soil test all over the country, because I knew that our soil recommendations were erroneous and they were wrong. And so that's the journey I started with EnSoil, because Russell was absolutely impressed with, well, he does no-till, he does cover crops, and he manages his nitrogen, like Yazzie and Camille talked about, lowering a systems approach, lowering his fertility, just polluting the right amount of fertilizer. Because we have to remember, these are salts, and salts are not really in high concentrations is not natural in natural ecosystems, especially soil ecosystems, and using biologicals like EnSoil. And Russell would absolutely brag about it. And if you know anything about Russell, he's fastidious. He's with the details and doing the research and doing the demonstrations, which I have a hard time getting farmers and ranchers to do. But he does it judiciously. So that's how I started with that. And then also, I love the approach. Biological approach is kind of, if you're involved in homeopathy or naturopathy, the soil and the body work very similar. And my wife suffered quite a long time with autoimmune issues, and that's why the typical doctor, modern medicine, can't address it, because it can't handle it with chronic diseases very well. Well, a lot of producers don't realize that our soils are chronically sick. They have been absolutely destroyed, hundreds and hundreds of years of tillage and over fertilization, over manure, poor rotations, not enough carbon, and not enough capturing a liquid sun, and not enough carbon cycling. But the paradigm, the approach, approaching the soil with the right molecules, like Camille and Yazzie talked about, using the right molecules. It's like biomimicry, using natural medicine, because the body will heal itself if you give it the right nutrients and it knows what to do with it. Same thing with EnSoil and some of these biological products. This natural system knows what to do with them. And the last one, I like the attitude of the people that we're dealing with. The Yazzie, Camille, Meredith, all the staff, they're very passionate. And we have this one thing, we all have this thing, we want to heal the land, but we also want to heal the checkbook of the rancher and farmer, that they're regenerative, that they can pass the next generation, the farm and ranch, to the next generation. And that includes if they don't have to use EnSoil anymore once their soils are healthy. And we really believe that. And that's why I got involved. So thank you, Yazzie, for setting it up, and we'll open it up to the group, whatever they want to talk about.
Thank you, Ray. If you would just take a couple more minutes to talk about how EnSoil can drive change in the regenerative sector, maybe 2 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up for questions at 7:30.
And give me a little bit about in reference to what, because that's such a broad statement. I mean, regenerative soils can heal all biological communities and deal with everything from climate to human health to animal health. I mean, where do we want to start?
Let's give a hypothetical of someone who has been a grower for a while and is looking to transition to more regenerative practices. How can EnSoil play a role in their transition or their trajectory?
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for being more specific, because look, first thing I do is when I consult all over the world, when I got back I just got back from Guatemala, consulting on 50,000 acres of sugarcane. And once I started to walk the fields and saw what was going on, and it's typical everywhere from Brazil, Venezuela, Guatemala. I just got back from there 4 months ago. Same thing. Soils are degraded, over-tilled, over-fertilized. And so the way I look at going to no-till and cover crops and EnSoil is kind of like gives it a jump start, so the healing process starts to heal very quickly. And so when you do a systems approach, EnSoil is an incredible part of the mechanism to start the healing process. Again, like my wife, she's taking biologicals for her body, and we're starting to see a change. That's the same way I look at EnSoil on how we can come and start the healing process in very, very degraded systems. And that's how I approach it.
Thanks, Ray. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate your wisdom as always. So we're now going to open up for questions and answers. It is 7:30. We want to respect your time, so we will finish up by 8. But if anybody has questions that they want to ask live and/or questions that they want to put in the chat, please feel free. The Q&A is open, and when you type it in, it will let us know so we can read your question out loud. Or if you just like to unmute yourself and ask, please go ahead. We're open to questions about anything, the company, how the algae works, any questions for Ray, go ahead. So I know we have one question from Trey. What routine would you apply EnSoil for medical cannabis? I can answer this one. So I'm assuming that you're either growing cannabis inside or in a greenhouse or maybe outside. So when we apply EnSoil, there's a specific ratio. We use 5 milliliters of the EnSoil concentrate to 1 gallon of water, and it's a sprayed product. So we recommend that you spray about once around the foliage and twice around the roots. So it's a 1/3 to 2/3 application. There's not really a way you can do it wrong. The algae is going to do its thing in the soil, but that really goes for any crop, including medical cannabis.
And then for the routine part of that, I think we have learned from growers and research that applying at seeding, at planting, creates the most benefits. And we usually recommend 3 to 4 applications, once at planting, another about 2 weeks later, when the plant starts flowering. And then we usually do it before or after flowering?
Before flowering, before fruiting, and towards the end of your grow.
And I would add to Camille is like, I would also do a little bit of inhaling so you can enjoy the process. I'm just kidding. But it's not.
Meredith does take chlorella.
You always have to test the fruit and see if it's working.
Oh.
Okay, from Chris, we have, could EnSoil help reduce excess nitrogen runoff from conventional over application? Let's start with that question. Ray, do you want to answer that one?
Well, again, it's a systems approach. First, I would be using the Haney test and the biological soil test first. The reality is we're over fertilizer by 50%. And what we're seeing on hundreds of thousands of soil samples from all over the world, we're over fertilizing. And so what the EnSoil will help is to help. I do believe that it's still helping with part of the cycling. And we're not sure of the mechanisms, but what I was reading, and it's beautiful how the cells are going into the plant. And we know now that plants are using bacteria as a nutrient source. So, yeah, I think EnSoil will help in that process, but don't forget that you're going to do a systems approach. And by doing cover crops, you're going to keep a lot of the nitrogens in the organic form. I want to see nitrogen in the organic form, not the inorganic form. And over applying nitrate salts, you'll always have them tend to be more in the inorganic form. So EnSoil will be a great part of this cycling. It's part of that whole mechanism. You can't separate one thing or the other. And I think that's the problem. We can't look at things disjointed. It's too reductionist. So look at things as a collective. The cover crops bringing more organic nitrogen in the system, building it, using the Haney test, and using EnSoil to do part of the cycling also. Do some of the lifting.
Great, thanks, Ray. So the rest of Chris's question, which I think some of it you just answered, but does it assist in locking that down by making life better for other soil microbes? Obviously, plants only need the nitrogen they need, but can the excess nitrogen be managed this way? And Chris is asking from the point of view of being an angler and having water quality concerns. Is there anything either of you want to add on that? I think.
Well, because we've been, even if we use the right soil, if we use the right soil test, we could help water quality way by huge amounts. Again, we're over applying by 50% at least at the minimum. We're not even giving credit to the organic forms of nitrogen. So absolutely, this could be again, systems approach.
Yeah, I would also add that excess nitrogen, over application of nitrogen is the biggest, even more than just fertilizer itself. It's the over application of fertilizer that's creating all the pollution in the waterways. So like Ray said, the combination of Haney test to see what you already have in there, the EnSoil cover crops would be a great way to lock it down and keep, even if you're still using fertilizer, keep it in the system.
Yeah, and manure, over applying manure. I have to consult on a lot of farms, big dairy farms, and they're over applying. They're putting chemical fertilizer plus the manures. Just way too much nutrients in the system, and it's not necessary. And here's another thing that's a real bad thing. Farmers aren't backing off. They can do the cover crops, they'll do the EnSoil, they'll do all of these things, but yet they don't do check strips and they don't back off and calibrate them soils. You've got to start backing off. Once about the second, third year, you start calibrating your soils, back off, back off, back off. We're not taking credit for that. And so that's a big issue. We got to start monitoring and doing check strips. As your soils get healthier, they need less nutrients. Because people have said, well, if we use cover crops, we're going to make things more soluble and we're going to lose more nutrients. Well, we want more solubility. That's why, but we don't want you buying more fertilizer. You can back off that fertilizer and take credit. Cover crops and microbes make nutrients soluble. Phosphorus, manganese, all of those make it in solution. Of course, they're going to do that, but you have to back off on these inputs.
Great, thanks, Ray. We have an anonymous attendee number 1. Thank you for being here. Is it able to be purchased for residential, decorative, and herb plant growth? Yaz, you want to take this one?
Yes, indeed. Anything that has soil, EnSoil Algae works great for, and even actually, I'm not going to go there, but yes, the answer is yes. And if you look on our Instagram, I've posted a bunch of videos of my sunroom with all of my plants, and they thrive with the EnSoil. And we have like small bottles that are perfect for house plants because, like we said, only 5 milliliter, a cap full for a gallon of water.
And Hannah, thanks for being here, Hannah. Is your company's main customer base transitioning farmers transitioning acreage to organic or regenerative? How do you see this fitting in with farmers that are already regenerative, or do you? So we expand our customer base to everyone, no matter the stage that the grower is at, whether that is traditionally super conventional all the way to some of the most regenerative folks in our customer base. We are working with everyone. Our main mission is really to meet people where they're at. So if we're working with someone who has a really traditional, conventional approach, we are not going to immediately tell them, get rid of all your fertilizer. That's not the point. We want to help them transition away from chemical dependence through using EnSoil as a tool. And then we also work with folks that don't apply any fertilizer or any amendments to their crops. And we encourage them to use EnSoil Algae as well, because this tool will consistently build up the soil biology and promote the soil health that we want in a regenerative system as well. Okay. Oh, Hannah has a clarification. Okay. EnSoil is stimulating the microbial community where they then mineralize nutrients that are in the organic form to make those nutrients plant available. But as Ray mentioned, you would really need to focus on maintaining or increasing your soil organic matter levels with management practices beyond the EnSoil application. Totally, that is definitely true. So as we said, this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. We are one part of a much larger management solution for regenerating land. And as Ray has been talking about, things like cover cropping and adding more soil organic matter to the system is very important to go along with the EnSoil. Ray, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things we do in reduction of science, we separate the carbon molecule. We separate carbon and nitrogen, and we really, in the soil ecosystem, you shouldn't really. The more carbon we bring into the system, the more organic nitrogen we're going to build up. They go hand in hand. So we notice when we look at the Haney test, when the soils get healthier and healthier, we notice that the pools of organic nitrogen go up. And you can only do that by increasing capture of solar energy and transforming it into liquid sun, those exudates, and building more carbon in the system, like you called it, organic matter. That's the only way we're going to build that and get that system to work. So it's a good way to look at it. I always look at those two molecules as they're brothers and sisters. I don't separate them. So the more carbon you build in, the more organic nitrogen we're going to build, and then we're going to back off. Because remember, plants can trigger and wake up the system, and they can turn on and say, hey, I want more nitrogen, I want more of this. They're much more intelligent than we have ever imagined. A lot of the science that we learned was, we're just learning, and it was antiquated. And now with the new, more science, we're finding out that it's more elegant than we ever thought.
Thanks for those questions, Hannah. Chris has another question. How much is over application linked to finance and farm insurance and that kind of wonky policy stuff? Ray, do you want to talk about this in terms of your ranch?
Yeah, well, I tell you, a lot of it's really based on all of those things are connected. You can't separate any of those items you just talked about, Chris. And the government programs, you imagine if you're in Australia and you don't have government programs, guess what? They have more schools there. They have more community groups where farmers and ranchers work together because they don't have bailouts from the government, from cost share and all those. And so it allows you to make those kind of decisions that are based on ignorance, really. And I was ignorant about the system too. I was making really, really bad decisions because I had the wrong premise. And what all the 8 years of college I spent was just, they taught me incorrectly. So
We got a frozen Ray.
we weren't taught, I'm frozen. Yeah. So I just want to wrap that up. So just understand we were based on the wrong theory.
Is there a difference? Franz is asking, is there a difference between biology complete compost extract and in-soil specifically for growing vegetables? Yes, there is a difference. So a compost extract is typically a liquid solution or extract of various microorganisms from compost. In-soil is exclusively live green algae cells of the strain Chlorella vulgaris in water. So there's no compost in our in-soil, and we're not adding any bacteria, we're not adding any other compost microorganisms to the system. We do have folks that use our in-soil on growing vegetables, and we would recommend, compost extract and in-soil is great to add all of that biology to the system. Those work really well together. We do have some folks working with us that are applying in-soil to their compost, like to vermicompost or to systems that have compost and plants growing. So that is definitely recommended as well. Jim, how does the specific algae mimic or supplement natural processes in the soil, being a freshwater species? Are these algae typically found in the soil? Ray, do you want to take that one?
Well, there are algae also on the soil surface. If you watch these crusts, they're also part of that nutrient cycling. So algae, you can see them on top of the surface. Also in rangeland, you'll see them create these crusts trying to start the healing process. So algae are part of that soil process. So they are in the soil too, not just in aquatic systems. And remember, soils are subaquatic ecosystems too.
And I saw one of the questions, it's down a little bit, but it's related, talking about from Sam asking how we chose this strain of algae. And it does have to do with the fact that Chlorella vulgaris is ubiquitous across all regions. It's found in all biology. It's a food source for all biology. And I think a common misconception when someone hears algae is they think of algal blooms, which that actually is, algal blooms are normally caused by blue-green algae, cyanobacteria. And we chose Chlorella vulgaris because in their research, they found it, saw how it was working, and it's found everywhere. So we're never flooding the system with something new.
Great. And going back to David's question, are there any regions of the country where this works better than others? Is your distribution national? Thank you. Yaz, you want to take this one?
I wouldn't say that there's a region of the country where this works better than others. It supports all living ecosystems. Our distribution is indeed national. We are able to sell everywhere except California right now, but we're very close to being able to sell there. It's been a couple-year process. Thank you, Frankie Riggs. She's our compliance who has gotten us to be able to sell all over. And we're starting to expand into outside of the US now. But I will say it works particularly great in Florida and Montana. We have a lot of customers in those two states.
And just to add to Yazzie, I think one of the things is we tend to look at regions so differently and soil types, but I think we need to understand one common thing all over the world. There's soil microbes all over the world. The soils function the same. Textures, climate may have some variations, but at the end of the day, it's soil biology that reigns in that ecosystem. So in that complexity, so they work very similar all over the world. So I think that's really important to understand. I don't care and I've been all over the country and been fortunate to live in various countries, but soil biology reigns and runs that system. So if you have soil microbes, the InSoil should work.
We are an OMRI certified product, and we also just want to mention that our global patent is pending right now, for those of you that are wondering about that. So I'd love to hear some other voices if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask questions, or you can continue to put things into the Q&A. We have one more from John. Is chlorella actually common in soils? I think, Ray, you just touched on this.
Well, and I can't tell you the exact species, but again, algae is a very common thing on the top of the soil surface, and I understand that they're part of that nutrient cycling in the healing process. That's all I know about that.
Thanks. So yeah, we'll just open it up for anyone to unmute themselves. We have about 10 more minutes before we're going to wrap it up with our contact info. And I'd also just like to note for anyone who has additional questions that they want to follow up on, or if we don't have time to get to everything, we will definitely respond to the answer to your question over email, or are happy to chat on the phone at a time that's convenient for you. So please don't be shy, ask away. And yeah.
And I'll also say, while we're waiting for some more questions, that we will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone that will include a survey, because we want to keep doing these and make them better and better, and also a document that talks about EnSoil algae for fall plantings. We want to emphasize it's never, like, there's never a perfect time or a bad time to apply the algae and build the biology in your soil. It doesn't matter if you don't have anything planted right now or everything's already grown. So if you're planning on doing cover crops, it's a great time to get some algae down, or just put it down with the soil. And you'll be able to purchase from our shop, or we do a lot of consultations. We love to talk on the phone first and create a plan for you.
And I'm going to be shameless, Yazzie. I'm going to please. I'm going to be doing a school on October 3rd to the 5th. It's going to be a soil health / grazing school for sheep. We're going to talk about how to design mixes, how to cover crop mixes, how to understand how the soil functions, how to design complex cover crop mixes for healing the soil. It's going to be from October 3rd to the 5th. And you can contact, if Yazzie leaves my wife's contact number, and there'll be a great opportunity if you want to learn more about ecosystems and soils. That will be a great opportunity for you guys to learn more. So,
me and Camille will be there, so you can meet us too.
Yeah, Yazzie and Camille are going to be there. So, thank you. So, keep me straightened out. But and by the way, and we do home cooking, so it's going to be a great opportunity to build community. And no, we're not going to be smoking cover crops. So, okay, so but we will have some beer and wine.
And John, you will be able to see this session again. It is being recorded, so we can get that recording over to you. Okay, Hannah asked, what components of the Haney test respond to an EnSoil application year to year? Is there an indicator you all are particularly interested in? Ray, do you want to talk a little bit about that test?
Wow, that's a good question. But let me tell you, and I'm real cautious, there's never just one indicator. I look at several indicators. It's just like the human body is so complex and so elegant. That's why when you go to the doctors, they do a blood test, saliva, fecal test, CAT scan. They do all of it together, and then they give you a holistic picture of what's going on. Same thing with the Haney. I look at the respiration. I look at how much water-soluble carbon has gone up, because that's the food. I look at how much organic nitrogen to carbon ratio, inorganic and to organic and. There are many things that I look, and that's one thing we teach in the school, how to read the Haney test and how to interpret it. Because just learning how to read the soil test, I can reduce your fertilizer cost by 20% the first year. It easily pays for the school and just coming to learn how to do that. So that's why I'm not going to give you this particular one thing. It's several things. And we also use the phospholipid fatty acid test to interpret also how what the soil is telling us. and the shovel and many things that I'll teach you in the class.
Yeah, the Haney test also gives, I think you said this, but soil respiration and soil organic matter are two things that Ray has definitely taught me to look at when interpreting other folks' Haney tests. So those are important as well, but definitely a whole systems approach. Okay, Diego. Oh yeah, go ahead, Ray.
No, and again, like the water-soluble carbon, water-soluble nitrogen, all these attributes all together give you a clear picture of what's going on.
Diego says, "Hi, dear Mr. Archuleta. My name is Diego Navas. I'm from South America, Ecuador. Please, I'd like to know when you brew compost, could be a good idea to add algae at the brewing moment or just at the moment to apply the brew?"
If you're going to put it in compost, like I would say, like you talked about, Camille, I would just spray it on, because if you looked at what the compost does, it's got the biology in it and it goes on the surface. Keep in mind, on the surface of the leaf, it's called the phyllosphere. It's this beautiful layer of bacteria that live there. They're called epiphytes. So spraying on the surface, that's why it was great, Camille, you mentioned about spraying on the surface, but I would use it in conjunction together. And I don't know what you think, Camille, about using it together like that.
Yeah, we have a couple of folks we're working with who have compost beds that are sort of naturally formed. So they just look like large raised beds with no plants growing in them. And they have worms in them and other microorganisms. And those folks are just spraying their beds directly. So we've talked a little bit about how the algae can be a food source, but that is literally what you're doing, is you're feeding worms, you're feeding compost. This might be a little bit different from your question, Diego, but when we have some people who will apply compost tea or compost extract with algae in the same sprayer, they'll go out on their field and spray those together. And that's great. That's a lot of microorganisms that you're adding to your system. We just recommend that you add those two things together right before you're going to spray. We don't want to create a competitive community of microbes in a sprayer tank. We want them to interact with each other in the soil and on the plants. So that's just something to keep in mind in case you are applying in addition to brewing.
And Diego, we don't want to give you bad information. I'd rather tell you, Diego, I don't know, than mess you up. So I'd rather do that. And by the way, Diego, I'm going to be in Venezuela in the last week in October. It'd be good to see you over there. You're not that far. I'm going to be in Venezuela.
Also, can I say, everyone, this is the first time we've done the webinar, and I didn't realize everyone was muted permanently by me. So everyone can talk now if you want. But we do have a few questions in the chat.
Whoops. Okay, John asked, have you done any testing to see the response of soils to algae application with regards to increases in soil organic carbon? And Ray, you talked about that a little bit, but yes, we have done testing on that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, what we got to remember, guys, when we say organic carbon, are we talking about the water soluble fraction of the organic carbon? Or are we talking organic matter, organic carbon in general? Remember, organic matter is about 58% carbon. And to raise organic matter is not a simple thing. And it's all context. It has to do with your rotation. It has to do with where you're located. If you're in very humid areas, wherever that is a very difficult thing to show. I would look at the health of the plant better as a better indicator than just looking at carbon in general.
Great. We have an anonymous attendee number 2. Is there any research on the effects of animals that consume algae-treated pasture? We know that they love it. I spray on a farm up in Michigan, and the cows trace the tractor, and they love to eat that grass right away when it's on the pasture. We have not done testing on the animals particularly, but we do know that the what we're spraying with the algae becomes more nutrient dense. So we do have a study that shows somebody who's growing hay that the cows will pick the hay that's been sprayed with algae over the hay that has not been sprayed with algae. So there is definitely that effect on the animals, that they know what is going to be more delicious and more nutrient dense for them.
And growers have also reported the cows eating less, like because the hay is more nutrient dense as well.
Go ahead, John. Do you have a question?
We're getting a lot of feedback.
I know.